In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O heavenly King, Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasury of good gifts and giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us of all impurity, and save our souls, O good one. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so our operative question today is, what is a gospel? What is this genre that we're going to jump into? And then the question is, what is the gospel? Props to English for having both an indefinite and a definite article. Makes that easy. And then, why are there 4 of them in the Holy Scriptures of Christianity? So, step 1, what is a gospel? Well, the English word gospel comes from godspel, which is not particularly informative, but it is from Older English, and it means something like good news. But of course, that doesn't particularly matter on its own, except that it does tell us what the parts of the Greek word that are actually used in the text come from. So the actual word that's being used for these documents is evangelion. Ev is a prefix in Greek. It means something like good. And angelion is a Greek word that means something like an announcement. So it's a good announcement. But the meaning of a word is not just its etymology. Words get their meaning from the way they're used. And so what does someone in the early 1st century AD, when they hear someone call something an evangelion, what are they expecting that to be? Just like if I said something like, I added this to my story, we all know that probably the more normal use of that term nowadays is probably something like, I posted it onto a specific form of social media, etc., etc., etc. But if you're not from 2024, I added it to my story. Like, if you said that to someone 20 years ago, it would have been something completely different, despite the fact that they're using literally the exact same sentence. So context is so important for understanding what's going on with something. So, what is an evangelion? Well, it's not really a word that gets used a lot in the singular, evangelion. It's usually ta evangelia, which is plural, the good announcements. And it is a military term, kind of, a religious term, kind of, and a political term, most definitely. If you heard someone refer to something as ta evangelia, the good announcements, what you're expecting is to hear someone tell you about some person, some figure, to tell you who they are, and that this person is going to be of utmost importance to the world that you live in. They're going to tell you what this person has recently accomplished that is the occasion for this announcement, and what is expected of you in response. So, let's jump to 8 BC in a place called Priene, where an evangelion, or a ta evangelia, was made. And if you go there, you can read it carved into the wall if you learn Greek. And what it is it says basically to the effect that the Holy Divine One, Savior of the world, Caesar Augustus, has brought the entire world under one government. He has defeated all of the enemies of humanity and has unified the entire empire under himself. And the empire is kind of anachronistic here. It's not they wouldn't have thought of that word yet, or a word that means that yet, but the whole Roman state. All the world is now Rome. All the world is now under Caesar Augustus, and he has brought utter and complete peace on earth. And he's making a grand tour. He's going to be stopping by your little town sometime soon. And here's what's expected of you. You will, by that point, have a temple built in his honor. You will, by that point, have a priesthood and sacrifices going on in that temple. You will, by that point, have changed your calendar so that the first day of the year is his birthday. You will have basically rewritten, imagine if they had science textbooks. You will have rewritten your science textbooks to state that the children in your city are learning that the sun and the moon and the stars revolve around not Earth, but him specifically. And a whole list of implied, and basically everything is different now. And you're welcome. Your life will now be extremely easy and pleasant and amazing. The barbarians will never come and eat your family, and et cetera, whatever. But that's what they're expecting from a document called an evangelion, from a document called a gospel. What they're expecting is to learn about some guy, some figure, who is this absolutely ubermensch of a person, who is way above and beyond by nature what you are. The recent things they've done, typically the defeat of their enemies and the establishment of their reign and their imposition of order upon the world, and that's peace and order, etc. And that now there's a list of like things that are going to be different about how your day-to-day, your town's day-to-day life goes. That's what a gospel is. These were not infrequent, just because like this is the kind of thing you expect after a big military conquest. You expect this after, now with Caesar Augustus, it's different because it's the whole world. But like, if Julius Caesar went up to Gaul and he conquered a bunch of places, there would be official announcements. Julius Caesar, as Imperator of Rome, now runs this place, and this is what it's going to be like, etc., etc., etc. Way before that, you have these things. Later emperors will do the same thing. They'll be like, we've conquered Bulgaria, and now the Bulgarians are under us, and etc., etc., etc. They'll tell the Bulgarians, this is not what this means. It would imagine if, I don't know, England decided they were no longer going to tolerate our rebelliousness, and they were going to retake the colonies these many years later. And they came in and they basically took over the entire United States, and they said, this general has now brought peace and order to the rebellious and chaotic Americas. You are now free and safe from all your enemies. You will erect statues of King Charles, if he's still alive by then. And this is now the first day of the year. The first day of the year is no longer January 1st. Let's pick some important year in English history, etc. etc., etc., etc. All your textbooks have to be rewritten, and etc., etc., etc. Everything's different. That's what they're expecting. Questions on the genre of a gospel? Going on then, when some guy in Podunk North Little Nothing Village next to an ocean, or no, not really an ocean, next to a sea that sometimes has fish in it, gets born, and 30 years later, he's like roaming around, not even Roman province of Judea, like the wasteland of Samaria. And then eventually he'll make it to Jerusalem, and fine, it's great, whatever. He's going around and he's like preaching in synagogues, and he's like healing people, etc., etc., etc. And then the Romans are afraid he's going to cause riots that would disrupt this great piece of said new, Roman thing. So he dies. They kill him. And there's still people who are like super into him. And that lasts, however long. And eventually, what ends up getting written, somewhere around 30 years after he's dead, someone writes down a little document, and they call it the Evangelion of this guy. What does that mean to people? Someone who is watching from the outside. Average person who lives in the Roman Empire. I was going to say Roman citizen, but actually, average person living in the Roman Empire is not a Roman citizen. What does it mean to them for someone to write down a document and say, this random guy who is dead, but also isn't dead, and I'll get to that later, this is the Evangelion. 1, this person is probably insane. Number 2, this is high treason. This is an act of utter and complete treasonous rebellion against the Roman Empire. Because what you're claiming is that the guy who's sitting on whatever constitutes a throne over in the eternal city of Rome, what you're claiming is that that person's no longer in charge. That this random person here has come in and has defeated all the enemies and is himself the presence of God on earth, and has defeated all the enemies, has brought peace to the world, and has utterly changed the entire structure of the cosmos, and now we all have to be different and live our lives differently, etc., 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 because the world is no longer the same. And you mean to tell me it was some, manual laborer from a village no one knows the name of, who, need I remind you, was killed 30 years ago. That's what's going on when the first person to write one of the Gospels writes a Gospel. And they call it that. I'm not going to get into which Gospel was written first because no one knows. But one of the Gospels only actually starts with the word Gospel. They all have their own different opening. We'll talk about that in a second and over the next 4 weeks. But when they're writing these things, they're all called the Gospel of something. It's just one of them has that as the first word of the actual body of the text. They're all called the Gospel, which is already weird because they're not called ta evangelia, the good announcements, which is the normal word. They're called to evangelion in the singular. The one and only singular good announcement. Which is a choice, right? That's meaningful that they're saying there's something utterly unique about this. Because again, ta evangelia is not a one-time thing. Everyone who's super cool has one of those one day. If you're rich and you're a Roman general, they all get a ta evangelia. This is not a singular genre. This is plural genre. There's multiple of these. And these people are claiming, no, there's actually only one. And frankly, it's not that this is a specific one among the many. It's that this is the only one. Every other evangelia has in fact not been a real one. There's something utterly unique and completely original about this one. And it is the only one. There is not another. And if you claim that there's another, you are in fact wrong. And that's something that, before these Gospels were written, you've got this guy named Paul, who's running around the Roman Empire causing all sorts of mischief. He actually at one point even says, there is only one evangelion. And even if I show up later and give you another one, that just means I'm wrong. There is only the one. And so this is part of the insistence of the preaching of the apostles, is that there is to evangelion. And so we expect it to look like, who is this person? What have they done? and what is expected of us now. And that's the gist-ish of each of the Gospels. In general, who is this person? This person is the Christ. This person is the Messiah. They will have to explain this term to most people because most people weren't Jewish. They'll have to explain this person is the person that was prophesied from all time to show up and to fix a bunch of problems you may not even know exist, depending on how you conceive of the fabric of reality. But also, they're here to make it so that death doesn't happen anymore. They're here to make it so that corruption of humans is no longer a thing. They're here to remove that. They're here to free every single human from all forms of slavery. Those are the three big problems that are going on, that they're saying this is what this person has come to do. And what have they done? They have come in and they have conquered the enemy. You used to be ruled by demons. And this is something every Roman citizen took for granted, is that, especially if you're an important person, you've got what they called a genius. And a genius is like a personal spirit that just takes care of, that is just interested in you. And it gives you basically what we would think of as like extraordinary good luck, talent, connections. The genius would have influenced the fact that you were born into a good family. The genius would influence the fact that you're naturally good at a bunch of things. The genius would have influenced the fact that you're very persuasive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's like a guardian angel, but it's a guardian demon. And that's what they thought of. And frankly, when they're making like altars to the emperor, the altar is actually to the genius of the emperor. And the emperor is if you're familiar with idolatry at all, the emperor is an idol, a living idol of that genius. And so there's all that going on. And so every Roman citizen was just like, well, yeah, demons are in charge. They didn't think of demons the same way that the Jews thought of demons. But they were like, yeah, everything has these spirits that are in charge of it. Da, 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 da. And frankly, if you're in ancient Greece and ancient Rome especially, but also these, other places, but by this point in history, everyone in these areas is really familiar with, ancient Greece and ancient Rome because that's where they're living. They're not even good ones. You don't even want them to be in charge of you because, frankly, they're mean. Read anything, and read is such an understatement. Read any Greek mythology. The stories they told about these demons, when they interacted with these beings, it was never good. They were never happy to be interacting with these beings. One gets the feeling that every time they write a song in praise of one of these, it's like, please, I'll say nice things about you if you leave me alone. Like, you get the feeling that even when they say nice things, it's not sincere. It's like, what do I need to do to keep this thing from being evil to me? There's an ancient, it is sometimes probably overgeneralized to say that the most common prayer in ancient Greece was, please just leave me alone. Like, you don't want the gods involved in you. You don't want them to be interested in you. I think of Arachne. Arachne, minding her own business, happens to be very good at weaving. And one of the goddesses looks at her beautiful. Again, she's just like off in her own little like whatever. And one of the goddesses comes down and is just like, you are too good at weaving, and I hate you. So I'm going to ruin your life. And to Arachne's discredit, she goes, you're just one of the gods. Try your best. Not a great strategy. The goddess takes that very personally and goes, oh, okay, so I'm right to destroy. But it's like one of these things where, like, frankly, Daedalus. Daedalus is just very clever, and he makes really cool things. And so everyone hates him because he's very popular and talented. And they're not, so they get angry at him. And the gods are jealous of him and things like this happens all of the time. And so when Christ shows up and they're saying he has defeated the enemies, he has conquered his enemies, he has done away with them, what they're claiming is all of the gods that are in charge of the world, all of them just lost their job. And they are now on the run. And real God has come back down and has said, it's been long enough that I have let you think that you are in charge of these things. And it's been long enough that the nations have been divided among you. That's it. It's over now. This is the thing I told you about a long time ago, dear demons. It's done. It's over. I'm back. Like that kind of a thing. And if you're interested in even more of the backstory, because I'm going to skip that for time reasons, if you're just more of the backstory on that, you can watch 50 some odd hours of YouTube that is of me recorded doing the Old Testament. And that's what the whole Old Testament's about, is how God is going to fix this whole demon thing. And so then comes the question of, okay, so what's expected of us? Like, what now? What's the point now? And that's brought up in the preaching of the apostles when they go out and they make disciples of all the nations. The idea being the ways that you used to treat the demons as rulers, the way you did, like, they defined your life. They defined the world. The fabric of reality has been fixed now. And so there's a way of living that is appropriate and proportionate and in congruity with the fixed fabric of reality. And that way of living is not the same as the way of living that made sense to you when the fabric of reality was broken and under the sway of the demons. And the details on that are read the whole Bible. So there's a lot going on there. But we just got done talking about the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes are a big part of that. And as we go forward with the Gospels for the next few months, I will get more and more and more into that, of what's going on here. What are some actual things? How are the apostles communicating what the meaning of the gospel is? Not just the sort of objective meaning, but what does it mean to you? And 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 what does it mean to me? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is an individualness as well as a collectiveness to all of this. And the championing, the calling card of all of this is Christos Kyrios. Christ is the Lord. In the Roman Empire, one of the things that was like, how did you prove your loyalty to the Roman society, is Caesar Kyrios. Caesar is the Lord. Caesar Kyrios. And so when the Christians are going around and their like hallmark phrase is Christos Kyrios, this Christ guy is the Lord. It would be like running around. Oh, our country probably doesn't make a super great analogy for it, only because, at least at this point in history, we don't have a totalitarian regime. Well, okay. Let's use everyone's favorite. Let's go to Nazi Germany. And if you went around and you said, no, Hitler is not the Führer. This Jesus guy is the real Führer. That would be the equivalent of going on. And that's like the thing you say out loud all the time in public, which means you're probably going to die. Because we all know what the Nazis were like. And if you know what the Nazis were like, you also kind of know what the Romans were like. There's significant crossover. If you've ever wondered why Hitler called himself the Third Reich, and you're like, the third is like, that's in a list of things. Second Reich was the Holy Roman Empire, started by Charlemagne. First Reich was the Roman Empire, started by this exact Caesar Augustus guy. So if you ever wonder why Nazi Germany has got like the big eagle thing, the eagle is the symbol of ancient Rome, etc., 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 etc. There's significant continuity. This is my call to everyone to stop romanticizing the ancient Roman Empire. It was not a great place to live. Questions on, in general, that like the gospel. Yes.
So in terms of like demonology, do like mental health issues stem from demonic influence and stuff like that?
Depends what you mean. I'll put it this way. Here's how I typically will describe it to people. You are not, so I'll tell you, here's some anthropology. You are not a body that has a soul. You are not a soul that has a body. You're not even a soul and a body together. All of those make the same fundamental error, that the body and the soul are like two things, and either one is more important than the other, or the other one's more important than the other, or that they're two things that come together. No. You are a living being, a living body, a living creature. So your body is you as existing in material reality, and your soul is the fact that your body is alive. So when we talk about material and spiritual, we as children of the Enlightenment, which is to say also children of the Renaissance, which is also to say children of scholasticism, which is to say children of the ancient Greeks. It goes way back. Anyway, there's this fundamental dichotomy between material and spiritual. And that's wrong. That is incorrect. That is splitting things that cannot be really in reality be split. They can be distinguished mentally, but a mental distinction does not mean that there's a real distinction. Because I can also distinguish between the light that a fire gives off, and I can distinguish between the heat that a fire gives off. But it's the same reaction that's causing both, and the heat and the light is photons, but photons are funky because they're basically like energy in motion, but like in a different way than like everything else is also energy in motion. So we'll deal with that. But like heat is also just the motion of that energy. So like, what do you, you can't have the energy is in motion and there's the motion of the energy. And somehow they're not two different things. They're just, I can understand this one reality from multiple like viewpoints. That's more of like what body and soul are. So with mental health issues, and now I'm going to take a step back and be like, with everything, it is impossible for there to be a spiritual reality that does not have a physical reality that is also it. There is no physical reality that does not have a spiritual reality that is also it. Not even a physical and a spiritual reality that are like connected, because that's still split. You can't have any reality that is not existing in all the different levels. So in my philosophy class that I teach, something I talk about with my students, the differences between objective, relative, and subjective. And we go through the same exercise over and over and over again, and they just never get it. It's fine. But there's no such thing as an objective truth. There is no such thing as a relative truth, and there is no such thing as a subjective truth. That's not what the word true means. True, there are objective realities, subjective realities, and relative realities, but even that's splitting things. It is most proper to say all real things, all realities have some relationship that is to all other things that is best described as objective. Some relationships that are best described as relative, and some relationships best described as subjective. Objective is that which never changes. It is true in the thing itself, with no relation to any other object, to any other time, to any other existence, to any other mode. Objective means it's in the object. Well, everything that exists has stuff like that. Everything that exists has something about it that's true of it, regardless of everything else. Relative is something that's true if, insert literally anything, everything's got that. Because even if something's material, then it has at least location, if not a whole bunch of other things. Location is relative. Time is relative. Space is relative. We're very familiar with that language. Thank you, Albert Einstein, and the paper that he also had read, but improved upon. We're used to that kind of thing. That's really what relative means. And subjective means it exists in the subject, and the subject is an observer. when you have an experience of something and you have a mental experience of that thing, that is a reality that exists only inside of you. And I'm not talking about the firing of neurons in your brain. That's part of it. But I'm talking like in your mind, in the immaterial mind. Which already sounds like I'm making too big of a distinction there, but it's fine. We'll get there. Inside of you is only where the thoughts that you let into your mind, they only exist inside of you. That is what we mean by subjective reality. Truth is when what's in here corresponds well to what's out there. When the subjective corresponds to objective and relative. That is the definition of truth. And so, I'm going somewhere with this. I got into describing those things, and I forgot why I was describing them.
Demons affect your mental health.
Demons affect your mental health, yeah. Boy, I mean, they do. It's great. It's actually not great. It's actually horrible, but, like, they do. But just, like, to say, in that same vein, my students constantly, right now in philosophy class, we're going over what is beauty. And so many of my students still want to say something like, beauty is subjective. And I have to keep looking at them and saying, what do you mean by that? Because what that actually means is that beauty is a reality that only exists in the mind of subjects and does not correspond to anything else. Which also means it can't be a thought they're having about another thing, because that thought about another thing corresponds to that thing. So if something is purely subjective, it has to sprout on its own, only in the minds of subjects, and have no interaction with anything. There's nothing like that. That's an odd thing to say when something is purely subjective. Only imaginary things are purely, like, you just can't do that. Or someone comes up to me and says, well, truth is objective. And I go, what do you mean by that? Do you mean it is only objective? That there is no subjective? Because if there's no subjectiveness about it, what you're saying is no one can know it. Because it can't exist in here. And that's never what they mean by it. But I'm also like, but it is technically what you said. And that's much of my philosophy class is, what do you mean by that? And learning to ask that question to other people when they say something, to go, I know what I would mean if I said that. That is not the same as understanding you and what you mean by what you say like that. And then, of course, the grand task of doing it to yourself. What do I mean by that when I say a thing? And have I communicated that reality well? And what is the actual meaning of the words I just used? And what are the implications of those? Do I mean to imply that, like, that is the point of philosophy class? It's learning how to think. A lot of learning how to think is taking a step back and just being like, so what does that sentence mean? What's the reality that we're trying to express here? I don't know if that answered your question, but it was fun to say. It was fun to go on a rant.
Are you wondering if demons can put thoughts into your head?
Yeah.
Yes, they can. Frankly, they're about the only thing that can. Spirits are what give you thoughts. Thoughts are not generated by your mind any more than visible objects are generated by your eyes. Your mind is an organ of perception, not generation. Your eyes, light hits your eyes, an image is presented to them, and then it goes through all the cool stuff in your brain and the back, next, etc. Your images and thoughts are presented to your mind, and your mind either does or does not let them in. So yes. The other half of this question, can demons read your mind? The answer is no. No, they can't.
Just your actions. Right?
Just your action. Oh yeah, they can watch you as what, just like I can probably guess pretty well what you're thinking in certain situations based on how you're presenting yourself. But no, angels and demons can't read your mind. God alone and you have access to that directly. Everything else that wants access to it has to actually basically infer about it from the fancy technical term in philosophy that we call energy, which I won't talk about right now, but basically the way you exist as a knowable being is an expression of you as unknowable, the unknowable part of you. Cool. Any other questions before I jump into a really quick overview of why there's 4 Gospels? Yes.
I do have one.
Yeah.
You had mentioned, and this also stems from the demon question.
Yes. People get so excited when you talk about demons. It's great.
When talking about Jesus, the gospel, releasing from these demons, this new way of life, do y'all believe in original sin aside to that, or is that
Depends what you mean by that.
a completely different thing? Like, was that a very Catholic thing to say?
No, it depends what you mean by that. So here's what we understand.
Okay.
In our first parents made an act of rebellion against God at the prompting of a demon. So what they did was, rather than act in the Holy Spirit, they acted in an evil spirit. They became the workers of the works of a demon. What that did to them was to kill them. And the actual primary meaning of death is to be separated from life. That should be no shocker. Life is God. Life proper is God. And so when God says, in the day that you eat of it, you will die. And then like Adam lives 900 more years, and we're like, oh, great. In that day, they were separated from God. And the demon, who's now currently being embodied by this being called the Nachash, we can talk about that later, he gets cursed. Bad news bears for him. Adam and Eve get what we call the garments of skin, which is understood as what they've been given is mortal bodies. So the material bodies they had before were what we call innocent bodies or prelapsarian bodies. We don't know what it's like. They're the only 2 humans who have ever had those bodies, who have ever had bodies that were pre-fall bodies that aren't also glorified saintly bodies. They're the only 2. You'll have to ask them what it was like. After that, they have a fallen body, which we all know what that's like because that's what we have. And the hallmark of these bodies is that they die. They experience a reality that is a physical analogy of death, basically. Is that our bodies experience a separation of body from soul. And I just earlier said soul is the life of the body. So they experience some kind of weird separation. And as much as I harped on, they're not 2 things that can be separated, that should tell you how weird and messed up death is. That it is best understood as a separation of two things that aren't 2 things. It is you being ripped apart. It's hard. And that's a consequence of separation from life. It's just like if you cut your hand off. All the things that will happen to your hand are consequences of it no longer being attached to its life source. So death. That is the primary effect of this original sin. Death. With that comes a darkening of the intellect. It is harder to know God because we are less like him. And the way your mind comes to understand things is to reflect it and be like that thing. And because we're less like God, it is harder to understand him. Concupiscence. We are attracted to sin. We are attracted to pleasure and usefulness more than virtue. So those are all effects of that. We see this play out in Cain, who kills his brother. We see this play out in the corruption of humanity up to the flood. We see this playing out then at the Tower of Babel. What we see is all of humanity gets scattered, and we're told in Deuteronomy what's going on there. So they're being divided, and they are separated according to the number of the sons of God. And sons of God is a fantastic phrase. It means angels. It refers to angels because scripturally, when the word son is used, I should say just in ancient text, basically, just like the primary meaning of death isn't the physical thing, the physical thing is almost like a metaphor. It's like a physical embodiment of that reality. A son means something that is like something else. And then physically, children are like their parents in this sort of, in sort of this way. But that's kind of the secondary meaning here. So the sons of God are the things that are like God. And they're the gods of the nations. The nations are divided according to them. And that's what we think about when we think about Zeus and Kronos and Isis and Marduk and all the different ones you can think of throughout all the stuff. And the phrase that the scriptures use is enslavement to them because they rule over us. And that's actually what the word God means in these ancient languages. It actually means ruler. And so when we talk about like a spirit moving a people, the spirit of a nation, the spirit of a school, the spirit of a parish, the spirit of a friend group, what we're really referring to in a real way is these spiritual beings that we cannot comprehend. We call them angels or demons, how we are interacting with them, because they are these sort of, they're spirits, they're the organizing principles, they're vast cosmic intelligences. There's lots of ways we can describe them because they're not like us, they're really hard to understand, but they affect us, they influence us, etc. So like, we're not free of them. What Christ has done as the unique Son of God, the one who is the Son of God, not only just because he's like God the Father, but also because he is of the exact same essence as God the Father. And so the angels are like, they're called sons of God analogously, because they're kind of like him. He comes down and says, all right, time's up, demons. I gave you this long to do stuff for various reasons I could go on and on about, but I won't right now for time reasons, etc. I'm breaking your yoke. And now it is possible to be free of the demons. You don't have to not serve the demons because you have freedom of choice. And so when we talk about things like sin, what we mean by sin is this corruption of our human nature. We're not free. I think probably the best analogy for it in some way would be sickness or addiction. Sickness is something that, frankly, you can't do that much about. The principle of medicine is that medicine helps your body fight a disease. It's really hard to do anything other than just help your body fight, because your body's built to fight it. Medicines typically just help your body fight it, or what they're doing is they're trying to manipulate what's going on inside your body in such a way that in the end goal, your body takes over and is now healthy again. But your body is enslaved. It is against your will, influenced by this. Addiction is like that. You literally aren't free if you're addicted. You actually are not capable of making certain choices. It's debilitating that way. And so those are kind of the images that are used to describe sin. The biggest difference that's going to show up between an Orthodox understanding of original sin and a Roman Catholic understanding of original sin is how important St. Augustine's understanding of what the primary effects of original sin are, and the first one being like culpability and guilt. St. Augustine innovates, and I have many wonderful things to say about St. Augustine. I love him a lot. But one of his innovations, because he can't read Greek, and so he's working from a translation of the scriptures, there's a whole bunch of apologetics I could make for Augustine on this. It makes sense why he comes up with this, is that we are guilty of the sin of Adam and Eve, as well as feeling all of these other effects. That is something that we would say, apologies, St. Augustine, that is not correct. That is not the faith of the fathers. That's not what was preserved in the whole church. That's something but then he becomes so influential, becomes the church father of the Western Church, becomes the theologian of all of Western Christianity, really. And so places where he is either in error or places where he is difficult to understand, the way he is appropriated into theology in the West ends up causing kind of this one kind of really big difference in the way that we understand original sin, causes differences in other places, but that's how we would probably respond to that.
So we're not guilty, but we still are affected by it.
You're affected by it, yeah. The same way that, like, if your parents suck, it's not your fault, but it is your problem. Like, it's going to greatly affect your life. But you're not guilty of that. It's not your fault. But it is something you have to deal with. And just because something's not your fault does not mean you don't have to do something about it. It just means you're not guilty. Okay. Really, really quick. Why are there 4 Gospels? Matthew, I'm going to go in this order. Matthew, Luke, Mark, John. Matthew is the gospel to the Jews. It is the gospel to the nation of Israel proper. Luke is the gospel to the nations, the other ones. So Matthew and Luke in some way make this nice pair between Israel proper, the 71st nation, or the first nation, and then the 70 nations, the non-Jewish people. Mark and John similarly make a kind of this nice pair. Mark is the gospel to the disciples. Mark's whole gospel structure is basically a discussion on how to follow Jesus, how to do the thing that you're doing. John, I'm going to refer to as the gospel to the gods, and here's what I mean. 1, John's gospel is the one that is the clearest, in some sense, about the relationship about kind of like the destruction of the demons, in some ways. What's more important is that the opening of John's gospel, if you scroll through, you'll find that he came to those who believed in him, and frankly, we should translate this to those who live a faithful life to him. It's more what that Greek word means. He has given the power to become sons of God. And if you actually know what the phrase sons of God means to anyone who's reading it, it means angels. It means these ministers of the kingdom, the people who are like God. And so the opening of John's gospel basically says, Jesus came down to make humans into gods. In that ancient sense, the word God is the ministers of the kingdom, deified, like him, insofar as he is the image of the Father. He does the Father's will. He is the king of the kingdom. And then we become the ministers of his kingdom. Like when you think of a guardian angel or a patron saint or something like that, that's our calling. That's actually what the point of all of this is to save us from death and to bring us into everlasting life in the kingdom, in the reign, in the ministry of the whole universe with God. So Matthew, the gospel to the Jews, Luke, the gospel to the nations, Mark, the gospel to the disciples, so people who, how do you do this life? And then John, the gospel to the gods. Basically, insofar as you are to become like Christ, that's the gospel that speaks kind of most directly to that experience of Christianity. And then next week, and the following 4 weeks, I'm going to go just hit one of each of those 4 and say, okay, Matthew, what is he doing? What's the gist of? So my goal for the next 4 classes is that you, after listening to them or after re-listening to them or whatever, they could be a good reference to sit back and say, all right, I want to read the gospel to Matthew. In whatever way, at whatever speed, et cetera, whatever. What's the gist? What's my grounding framework for what I'm dealing with when I'm in Matthew's gospel? Or when I'm in John's description of the gospel? Or when I'm in Mark's description of the gospel, et cetera, stuff like that. So that'll be the next 4 weeks. I have 30 seconds for questions, comments, concerns, complaints, then we have to give it up for Vespers. Yeah.
You said something about usefulness.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So, classically, there is understood to be 3 ways that something can be good. So, we call something good because it is desirable. We just say we call something good because We want to draw close to it. We want to move towards it. We want to seek it out. That's why we call something good. You can seek something out for your own sake, so that you will be a certain way when you have achieved it. You can seek something out for its sake, because it is a certain way. And you can seek something out for something else's sake, because it is a certain way. And that kind of covers your whole universe. We call it pleasant when you seek it out for your sake, because you want to be a certain way when you're around it. You want to feel happier, etc., etc., etc. We call it virtuous when it is sought for its own sake, because it is good in and of itself. There's an objectiveness there. You can also see how this is like subjective, objective, relative. We call it useful when we pursue it for the sake of another thing, as a means to that end. And so classically, that's what we say when we say something like pleasant, virtuous, useful. What we're describing are, in some ways, a subjective-centered understanding of good, an objective-centered understanding of good, and a relative-centered understanding of good. I taught that 2 days ago. That's why it's fresh in my mind.